All right, welcome everyone. Sorry we're starting a little bit late. I got caught up in other things. Tonight we are moving to Class 2, Hermetic System of Progressions. And I am going to repeat some information from last week, only because it is my nature to repeat myself. And just in case you don't, wait on every word, there's a second opportunity to hear it. So that's how tonight's going to work. We talked last week about the Hermetic System of Progressions and how they involve major, minors, and transits. And I wanted to let you know that tonight's class and the next couple of classes are going to be a little bit different than my normal method of instruction, which is primarily lecture. We will be doing lecture in the beginning of the class, but I am going to be flipping back and forth between the PowerPoint presentation and looking at charts. Several students have given me permission to work with their charts, as well as I have charts of notable persons. And in order to see how progressions work, we'll be looking at their charts as they are timed for specific events. What this also means is I am going to have to go back and forth between my laptop and the podium tonight. So you'll see me traveling across the room in order to go between the two different systems. I don't have a keyboard up here to work with. If in the course of the evening any of the students who are participating online has a question about their chart that actually pertains to the topic we're discussing in class, you can in the discussion box on the left-hand side of your screen, you can send that question over. That implies that I have permission to open up your chart in class and share it with the students. So that's basically the preface for tonight's class. Quote of the day comes from St. Thomas Aquinas, who said, "The celestial bodies are the cause of all that takes place in the sublunar world." If our mic is working well, you'll get a lot of great background sound right about now. As described in last week's class, this is where I get to start repeating myself. Those of you that missed last week's class will benefit, and those of you who attended will also benefit. You get to hear it twice. Major progressions are determined by the movement and position of the planets each solar day after birth. One day is roughly equivalent to 1 year of life. Each 2 hours after birth are equal to 1 month of life, and each 4 minutes after birth equal 1 day of life. So this is the time relationship when we're looking in the ephemeris to determine the planetary positions for major progressions. Of course, this is quite simplistic, but it gives you the idea of what the astral to physical time ratio is. Major progressions carry 1/2 the power of the natal chart and correspond to the major events and experiences in one's life. I should check and see if I even turned the microphone on. That would be helpful. Oh, yeah. Helps when the red light's on, huh? Can you hear me now?
That's pretty good.
Those of you who received last week's handouts, I did correct myself in class. In the statement directly following 1/2 the power of the natal chart was a statement saying 1/4 the power of the natal chart. I inserted that just to see how many of you were actually awake during class. So I thank you for those of you who pointed that out to me.
So it is 1/2, huh?
It is 1/2. That's a lot of energy.
No, but I was thinking that it was 1/2, and when you said 1/4, it just,
Threw you off?
yeah, I was,
Just stirring things up.
that's all right. Makes me look.
Yes, it made you think. Hopefully some of you actually went home and looked it up in your books. All right. In analyzing major progressions, attention is given to the progressed position of the planets, the type of aspect they form, the relative power, harmony, or discord of their natal positions, and any houses they govern by rulership. Remember, we also look to the sign that falls on the cusp of each house, because those houses will also be stimulated by any major progressed aspect. That statement will make more sense to you when we actually start to look at progressions in class. On to a quote. From Progressing the Horoscope by C.C. Zane. The quote is, "Astrology does not foreshadow events which are inevitable. It maps thought cell activities which influence the thoughts and behavior and exert extra physical power on the environment in such a way as to make certain events probable." So when we go to look for what and when events will happen, this is the approach we take. And in last week's class, I showed you imagery that represented the interaction between the astral and the physical, and basically how that works. With the astral interpenetrating and having a molding effect over the physical, events which are happening in this time ratio, we decided 4 minutes to an entire day, translate over the epoch boundary line and bring events to pass in the physical world. So things are happening in the astral realm, in the astrological realm, before filtering down to slower moving physical substance. All right. Major progressions are placed in the secondary wheel of the chart. This is in the 2-wheel chart, this is the outer wheel. Here's a key concept. Importance of event depends upon intensity of thought cell activity. Another quote from Progressing the Horoscope. In predicting what events will be attracted into the life at a given time, therefore, the first thing to do is to consider the normal composition and activity of the thought cells within the compartment of the astral body affected. Then consider the volume, type, and harmony or discord of the energy added to the stellar cells within the compartment, and estimate not merely the amount of activity which will result from this new energy supply, but also how the new energy supply modifies or accentuates their normal feeling of harmony or discord. Translation? Look to the natal chart first. Keep in mind that all progressions do is they stimulate the innate conditioning of the natal chart. This is determined by how powerful an area is in the chart and then its conditioning. In the natal chart, which is determined by astrodynes, is the natural expression of that planetary energy harmonious or discordant? Because you can be guaranteed that when a planet moves forward by progression to trigger or to stimulate that area of the natal chart, what is being stimulated is basically the patterns that are in place already. It takes the rare person who can redirect a progressed aspect to manifest in a different type of activity or trend than is reflected by the natal chart. This is the last class of our series when we talk about the alchemy of progressions, how to look forward in your life to see what energies are going to hit you, and then by determining the planets involved and the houses involved, how you would actually like that energy to express in its most ideal way. So that's sort of the magic of the process. And is there a question online?
Yeah, from Jeff from Chicago. Does delineation of the progressed planets involve aspects between the other progressed planets, or aspects between the natal planets, or aspects between the transiting planets, or some combination thereof? Question mark?
That would be D.
All of the above? Yes.
All of the above. However, tonight what we are talking about is specifically major progressions. Next week, we're going to look at minor progressions and how minor progressions trigger major progressions. And then the week after that, which I think is, what, May 4th? I don't know. We will be looking at transit progressions and how transits come along and trigger major progressions that are also reinforced by minors. So all of them apply, and the rest of your question will be answered somewhere within the next dozen or so slides as to what is being affected by any progression. But great question. Thanks, Jeff. And also glad to see you're in class. Each progressed aspect attracts its own type of event. Harmonious and discordant progressed aspects do not annul each other. They attract different events into your life. So you can have numerous aspects operating at one time. The slower moving the planet, the longer the aspect is in orb. And I can imagine that all of you, whether it's in a week, a month, a day, or a year, experience good events and bad events. And these are all indicated by different progressions that are going on in your life. So what we want to do, and this will in part answer your question, Jeff, but when we look at a chart, to determine what type of events are being attracted, the first thing we want to note is the planet. What planet, by progression, is forming an aspect and or is receiving an aspect? We look to the matters of that planet, the matters governed by that planet, and then what the astrologer does, something that a computer cannot do, is you have to start synthesizing information. You have to look at the nature of the aspect. Is it something that is powerful, like a conjunction or opposition? Moderately powerful, like a square or a trine? or sextile, whether it's mild, like a semi-square, sesqui-square, semi-sextile, inconjunct, we take that into account because the nature of the aspect tends to indicate the nature of the event and the volume of energy available. But we also have to look to that planet in the natal chart, to its relative power, and whether that power is conditioned with harmony or discord. Chances are I've lost some of you at this point, but this will become much clearer when we start doing our hands-on. So, nature of the planets. If the aspect is involving the sun, what is it going to affect?
Vitality.
Your vitality. It affects your energy, your sense of significance. It affects your sense of authority. Major progressions of the sun last for approximately 2 years. A little bit further on in class, we're going to actually look at charts tied in with events. I want to cover tonight some specific subjects, such as honors and status, which we normally think of as the sun, and also romance and partnership, marriage. Why? These are two subjects that people are really interested in, so might as well start off with them. Question?
Just a quick one. With the where you've got in the sun, you mentioned that it was the sense of within the individual, but can it also mean that events? I mean, it's a two-way street. You know, that events and people will respond in such a way.
There's that lovely inner feeling you have that goes with the sun, which is self-worth, and then it's the way the world responds to you. How is the world going to respond to you with the sun aspect? Honors, recognition, the ability to gain status. Those are the general things that the world bestows upon us. Position corresponds to that. Whether it's becoming president of a country, or whether it is becoming the leader of your particular group at work, or gaining a new title in the workplace, or in a community-based activity. These are all aspects of the sun. It can be getting a trophy, an award, a plaque, or just a hearty handshake and a pat on your back and an announcement at a meeting.
Is it also loss of credibility and credibility?
Thank you. That is the other facet of this. There's an upside and a downside to all of this. So sun progressions can also bring about experiences that bring a loss of credibility, or what we might call a loss of honor. This is when you're involved in some kind of public scandal, or where you don't get the position or the job, or you're passed over for the title. Anyone else want to contribute a afflicted sun? No?
Could it be people could do things to make you lose face, or spread rumours? I mean, there could be other means for making you look not good.
Yes, and this can be perpetrated by others. It could just be, events of not, reaching the bar with the goals that you have.
And political.
Or it could be things such as political scandals.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing, I must tell you, I love watching around election time political commercials.
What comes up there, huh?
And how stupid they think we all are. And who knows, maybe the masses are. But they are the most simplistic attack campaigns. And that is a great example of an afflicted sun, would be watching negative political ads. If you ever want to get a sense of what that's about, it's basically somebody else helping to air your dirty laundry.
So if you're looking at like, is it defamation of character, slander, all of those things,
That's the sun.
and then you look wider into the chart to see exactly what's going on there, how it's coming about.
Correct.
Right.
Could you also feel powerless when an afflicted sun
Mm-hmm.
and overcompensate?
Yes, and it depends on what other planets are involved. If Saturn or Pluto is involved, that can contribute to a greater sense of powerlessness and or conspiracy. This is stimulating a lot of conversation tonight. What if the moon is involved? Any progressed aspect of the moon affects the mental attitude, the domestic life, and the everyday affairs. We consider major progressions to have 1/2 the energy of the natal chart, except for the moon, which has only 1/7 the power of the natal chart. The moon moves so quickly and affects everyday affairs that generally we don't see the major events in life being impacted by this. Lunar aspects are only just under 2 months in duration. Now, one of my favorite lines is, there is an exception to every rule. That exception can be if, one, the moon is your dominant planet. You are going to feel lunar progressions more prominently than most people do. The major progressed moon moving through angular houses is also felt more prominently than in other positions. And of course, conjunction to natal planets by the major progressed moon are felt. So there are some exceptions to that rule, but nevertheless, for the most part, the major progressed semi-sextile from the moon to Mercury in your chart is not going to be a major event in your life.
What about when it's a progression to natal moon position?
Thank you, Vicki. That's actually a very different experience. And this carries much more power. When it is any of the other 9 orbs that we look at, forming an aspect, be it a conjunction, opposition, trine, sesti square, etc., to the natal moon, that is felt very prominently. And what it affects during that period of time is your mental attitude, your domestic life, and your everyday affairs. If the moon's harmonious in your chart, you'll find your domestic matters generally going well. Your moods being somewhat bright and shiny. The nature of the aspect can determine the nature of the events to some degree. Again, oppositions to the moon can oftentimes represent a familial conflict or a relationship being pulled apart, someone being separated from you. So we have to engage the nature of the aspect, but always looking at the energy of the natal planet. Harmonious moon aspects could bring about a pleasant mood for repainting your home, or getting new towels and sheets, or having one big happy family picnic. If the moon is discordant, then this takes us into the realm of moodiness, family upsets. Issues with food can come about during those periods of time, and issues with food and diet, and also a little bit different than the public smear campaigns on television. One of the negative qualities of the moon is gossip. And this is just a more, subtle undercurrent that takes place. It's not quite, a mass media, smear campaign, but it has its effects. It has negative effects. Mercury. Any progressed aspect of Mercury affects the mental interest, the facility or accuracy of expression, and increases the cerebral activity. Major progressions of Mercury last for approximately 18 months. Same with Venus. Venus aspects are approximately 18 months. Why do I say that? Because these planets, more than the others, have opportunities to go retrograde. And if that happens while the planet is within progressed aspect, it can lengthen the period of the aspect. So, if you have harmonious aspects to Mercury, what's going on? You have the opportunity to think clearly. Imagine that. You can be precise in your communications. Those are the times in your life when you go to reconcile your bank statement and it all comes out accurately. So matters of accountancy and expression work well. If Mercury is afflicted, then under progressed aspects to Mercury, you can go through periods of nervousness and restlessness, or just somehow always saying the wrong thing, or not being able to get the books to balance. These are some of the errors that come about. Or you go through periods where you misplace your keys, you can't get your printers to work. There could be a variety of little errors that take place.
Christopher, I have to go back, ask about the sun. This is, takes a few minutes for people. People are a little confused. They say politics is ruled by Saturn, Capricorn, and some people believe Pluto has power with the politics. And then somebody says the sun equals authority. So people are getting confused with Capricorn and Saturn. Saturn, and then power and political urges, and then the sun. Can you explain the differences between those two?
Perhaps.
Because everybody's just talking about it.
Okay.
Or do you want to wait?
I think I'll wait until we actually start looking hands-on at charts. I'll address that briefly now. The sun does rule the male sex in general and the ruling authority. And again, the notes from last week were far more comprehensive than what I'm giving you tonight. There's details of everything the sun rules. Now, in most societies, we have basically a two-party culture. And the Democrats are considered to be ruled by Saturn and Republicans Jupiter. However, as time goes on, those boundaries become less clear. But that has been the traditional rulership in politics. And I think it's far more complicated now than that. But Capricorn rules governance in general, and Saturn, of course, is the structure, the legality of governance. It's basically law and order, so to speak. It's governed by that. When we go to look at charts a little bit later in regards to honors, position, status, we will see that what is involved is the sun and or the midheaven or the 10th house is involved. If the sun's not involved, you'll almost always find the midheaven engaged in opportunities for political rise, for raise in status, for career advances, which are also political, but on a minor level. So we're looking at several things with those types of questions. Is what's the sun doing? What is the midheaven doing? And is there any aspect to either planets in the 10th house or planets ruling the cusp of the 10th house? Question, Vicki.
Well, I was wondering, do you think the confusion might come from the fact that Capricorn is the natural ruler of the 10th house?
Absolutely.
And it does seem to be concerned with
Position, status.
and climbing the ladder, as it were. And,
Right, so the confusion is, again, Capricorn/Saturn is the natural ruler of the 10th house. So to some degree, we're looking at that position in a chart, but not necessarily the sign or the planet Saturn. All right, what was I talking about? You interrupted Venus. What's with that? All right.
So easy, though.
Yeah, she just sat back and took it. Yes, any progressed aspect of Venus affects the emotions, the social relations, the artistic appreciation. Major progressions of Venus last for approximately a year and a half. So what can happen if you have progressed aspects to Venus? Venus is the social urges. One thing astrologers get asked about a lot is love. And you can be guaranteed that not everyone out there is having as much luck in love as you might think. Finding a suitable mate is definitely the consternation of almost every life form on Earth. Except for those that are, asexual or self-seminating.
We don't know though, do we?
You know, snails, planaria, slugs. You know, it can happen or not. They have an okay arrangement. But for many other species, this is really a huge deal. So Venus is important, at least judging by the type of questions people come to an astrologer with. This need to love and to be loved, to have social relations. And the ability to be social and have relations is one indicator of an individual's ability to have partnerships. They are tied into one another to some degree. So anytime you have progressions to Venus, you got a chance for finding love or losing love, depending upon the nature of Venus in your chart and the nature of the progression. What do you think oppositions and squares to Venus will do?
Strain those relationships.
It does strain things. So, and here again, this is using the overlapping theory of aspects. The other thing we look at for love in a chart, and I'm going to repeat this later, is we look at 5th house. The 5th house, any planet in the 5th house or the planets ruling the cusp of the 5th house have to do with love affairs. Love affairs are very different from marriage and partnerships. They're generally a lot more fun. Unless it's, some kind of fatal attraction thing that's going on. Then it gets kind of creepy. Partnerships in marriage is an enormous commitment and involves responsibility to another person. Love affairs don't usually come saddled with responsibility, but true partnership does. One has to have the care, the concern, the well-being of the other person first and foremost in their mind for it to be successful. So what we look at in partnership, for marriage, one is looking both for either aspects to Venus that are favorable by progression or aspects involving planets in the 7th house or planets governing the 7th house. The other thing to take into account when you're looking at your chart in regards to love if you have a harmonious 5th house and a discordant 7th house, you might discover that love affairs work really well, and when you get married, it becomes disastrous. Vice versa. If you have a really harmonious 7th house, but a really crappy 5th house, you might discover that you hate dating, and therefore it can sometimes become difficult to get married because you're not willing to go through those initial processes that are part of the mating dance. Once you're in relationship, you can be a very happy person, but getting there could be a process that you find really unpleasant. Any thoughts on Venus? Harmonious? Yeah. You're having a good time. You're having friends. You're going out to hear music. You're feeling artistic and creative, or you're going to the museum or going to art events. If it's discordant, then, get a box of Kleenex. Because chances are you may have a few weepy nights. You're going to be mourning over, lost love. Nobody loves me, everybody hates me, going to the garden to eat worms. It's an afflicted, progressed Venus.
Just one thing about the artistic appreciation, I always have a bit of a problem with it because it's such a narrow sphere. I'm wondering, could we generalize it to appreciation in general and beauty in general?
That to me is artistic appreciation, because it can be music, it can be movies, it can be theater, it can be culinary arts, which involve eating. What are things we call arts? Theater arts, music arts, visual arts, literary arts. It could be reading literature or poetry. It could be going out and working in your garden. I don't know if we call it horticultural arts.
But I mean, yes, it's the arts, but I mean, appreciation, just as
Of beauty, yeah.
in general, in life.
The sense of
whatever.
beauty
Yeah.
in life increases
Yeah.
for you.
Okay.
You can go out and look at a blade of grass and think it's just divine. We could change it from artistic to aesthetic, because that's more all-encompassing. All right, things aren't fun anymore. Any progressed aspect of Mars brings strife. Imagine that. Haste and increased expenditure of energy. And the really good news is, any major progression of Mars lasts 3 to 4 years. It's just not fair. Venus progressions last 18 months. Mars progressions 3 to 4 years. Saturn progressions 15 years. I know. It's a veil of tears. So, again, and it also depends on Mars' energy in your chart. Remember, Mars has 1/4 discord that he brings with him wherever he goes. So, any progression, there's still going to be some friction involved in what you're doing. If Mars is positive, then during those periods of time, you can actually get a lot done. And I feel like it's a good time to sort of enter, I don't know if this is a disclaimer or a testimonial, but
Well, make up your mind.
based on over half a century of personal experience, I've actually found that I make the greatest moves forward in my life under discordant progressed aspects. The biggest personal changes, transformations, character changes, accomplishments come during those periods of time. Notice I didn't say fun. But These are the building blocks of character. And so we have to approach progressed aspects from that perspective, knowing what their potential is, but having expectation of what their greatest potential can be. So if it's Mars, you're going through energy during that period of time, but you need to watch how that energy is expressing. Again, it says haste and strife. And the nature of Mars is to function from impulse. And as I always like to say, remember that the bulk of our prisons are filled by persons who have had poor impulse control. They didn't think about the long-term consequences of what they were doing. It was the heat of the moment. And that is what Mars brings. So we have to be really appropriate under Mars progressions. Because Mars progressions can also bring into your life, being right at the center of location when the fight broke out. You may not have been the person swinging, but you could have been caught in the melee. You may have been driving very well, but had no control over the person who rear-ended you and gave you whiplash and a concussion. Or you may go skiing and discover you have to get a knee replaced the next week. There's any number of things that happen under Mars progressions. Jupiter.
Oh boy.
Yes. I take that back. Jupiter aspects last 12 years, so there is a God. Any progressed aspect of Jupiter affects the individual through abundance, increased optimism, and joviality. So under progressions to Jupiter, these are periods in your life where you start feeling better about things. If Jupiter is the planet forming the aspect, then you know it's going to last close to 12 years. If it's Mercury forming an aspect to Jupiter, well, you might get 18 months of a good mood happening. That could be a time where you find your optimism, your cheerfulness, your bright thinking going on. If afflicted, though, Jupiter can bring in experiences that involve conceit, going through religious fanaticism or holier-than-thou periods in one's life, or getting oneself into trouble through overly optimistic thinking.
Self-aggrandizement.
That could, during those periods, you could definitely feel more important than others may value you.
When you talk about over-optimism, could it also be that your thoughts are more expanded? I mean, not in a good way, but in a way where you kind of lost a judgment, or was something else come into that?
No, judgment is impaired under Jupiter aspects, which can be a good thing sometimes. Our dinner time conversation with Erica described that for much of her life, she went through life fearless. That's actually a form of impaired judgment.
It sure feels good, though.
Because all evidence and the 10 o'clock news would, point to walking down dark alleys at midnight is not a great idea. So, but, and that's also something that's oftentimes tied into youth, where we feel invincible. And then as middle to old age sets in, we start to feel the opposite of that. Yes.
I'm sorry. Is it more profound when Mars enters a new sign or when Mars enters a new house? More profound.
Now I have to think in terms of profundity. I think Mars entering a house is probably more significant than Mars changing sign. And that's just my personal opinion. This isn't anything that's in the Brotherhood of Light lessons. When any of the planets change sign, there is a mild change that takes place. And although, as we say, progressed planets have 1/2 the power of the natal chart, I am not a believer that when a planet progresses into a new sign, that suddenly there's a huge character shift that takes place. I still think the individual operates out of the conditioning of the natal chart, and that there's almost a change in tone or color or hue, whether it's the progressed sun, the progressed moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, or any of the other planets going into a new sign. It shows opportunities to adjust thinking in new ways. But there certainly is not an overnight shift in consciousness that happens, and suddenly a whole new expression where the day before it was something different. However, when a progressed planet moves into a new house, influences can be felt there almost immediately. And this is one reason why I work with the Placidus house trust system, is that I've actually been able to observe planets moving into houses suddenly impacting the new house in which they've moved into by progression. So, hopefully that answered the question. Did we talk about Saturn?
No.
Did I just try to slip over that one? Oops.
We know where your head's at.
Yeah. So far into Saturn, I can't see daylight these days. Well, guess what? Work, responsibility, and economy or loss. Out of all of those adjectives, I think I like economy the best. So,
Can we say opportunities for release? That could be nice.
Release.
that would be, yes, that sounds better than loss. Opportunity to release. It's like getting your back cracked or something. Oh, which Saturn rules? The chiropractor.
That would be perfect.
My dad did chiropractic and he was a Capricorn, so
Oh, good.
very well placed.
Good placement. Yes, so when you go through Saturn progressions, life starts to feel heavy. You start to feel somewhat burdened, even when you have a harmonious Saturn. What happens is the workload just gets heaped a little bit higher during those periods. The advantage, if you have a harmonious Saturn, is that you can organize your life in such a way that you can handle it. The rest of us have problems. Uranus, any progressed aspect of Uranus affects through something sudden, through a human agency. What the heck is a human agency?
I don't know.
Well, it's any one of you and anyone you know.
Yeah,
That is the human agency. It is the
So
person
through
that,
human interaction.
or intervention might be another word we use. Though these days intervention usually sounds like,
Section.
yeah, since someone's in a crisis and needs to be stopped from what they're doing. But nevertheless, I like to think of Uranus as, the human element of Uranus as being catalytic. It's that chemistry that comes in that sparks change. You may not have thought about something that way until you met this person, or the opportunities may not have flowed in your life until you met this particular person. So that's the nature of Saturn.
They can leave pretty quick too.
Precisely. They may just be there to spark that change. So, if it's a Saturn-Venus aspect, enjoy the ride. It doesn't necessarily mean that person's sticking around, but it can sure be exciting while they're there. If it's Saturn-Mercury, you're going to be having, excuse me, thank you, Uranus-Mercury.
Yeah.
I slipped.
They're both on the same page.
They are. Yes, Uranus, Mercury, you may be having, your brightest ideas during that period of time. And then you could go on to study a whole other topic. Been there, done that, lost interest, moved on. Now, if Uranus is harmonious in your chart, it's bringing things about in a novel way, in an exciting way, in a way of discovery and invention. If it's discordant in your chart, then there's a good chance you're just getting quirkier. People are having a harder time relating to you. When they cross the street, when they see you a block away, that's a good sign. It's at a point in your life where you just may be being, contrary or radical for the sake of it. Oppositional. Two more to go. Any progressed aspect of Neptune increases the imagination, sensitivity, and attracts schemes.
What does attract schemes kind of mean?
I have a great loan for you.
I have a bridge in Brooklyn that you could buy.
Right. It's usually, I have a great idea, but I need you to implement it.
Exactly. And around here, we need a lot of people like that. Yeah, that's a scheme. A scheme is something that somebody has dreamed up, and in their imagination, it's really great. But when you try to get the environment to support it, it doesn't work. That's a scheme.
Does it attract schemes that work?
10% of them work.
10% work. Thank you, Vicki.
You know that?
Well, that's what C.C. Zane said.
Well,
And actually, I think that probably is.
he actually, I think, says 90% of them don't come to pass. So it's implied that 10% work. It doesn't phrase it as optimistically as 10% work.
Or you get 10% of what you thought you were going to get.
Right, it's not $100,000, it's $10,000. So, the profit's not quite what it was marked up to be.
That could be also people thinking they're going to get a really good income from some internet business that doesn't take off. It looks great.
Yeah, it's a scheme, that was their dream. It could be me spending $1 a month on the lottery. After 20 years it adds up. But, the fantasy is great.
Yeah.
The dreams are wonderful with that, but the statistics in the environment that support that happening aren't quite there. Pluto, any progressed aspect of Pluto affects through groups, through subtle force, and brings either coercion or cooperation. kind of boils down to those two words. If Pluto's harmonious, or you have a harmonious progressed aspect to Pluto, things are conspiring to work for you through the assistance of groups, through others. And if it's afflicted, things are conspiring to try and get you to work for them through coercion, manipulation, subtle force. Of all the planets, Pluto is the most dualistic. And I think one of the hardest to move towards constructive behavior.
In terms of an alchemy?
Yes, because some cultures are better equipped with early training of thinking of the welfare of the group. And some cultures are not. They are geared towards thinking solely of the benefit of the individual. So in those environments, it's the hardest thing to train someone to extend their thinking outside of what they want, to be able to see the impact of their thoughts, feelings, and actions on those around them and the largest group. So Pluto takes a lot of work to purify. It's usually spending its energies thinking of, how can I get you to do what I want?
Is that, I mean, I'm just wondering about a more, what's the word? Not philanthropic, beneficial kind of attitude that, I mean, that sounds rather negative to me, you know, spending a lot of its time thinking about getting people to do what the individual wants, but could it also, if you look at it in a more evolved way, could it be looking at ways that you could get groups to fulfill something that's really good?
Here's a perfect example, which you actually partake of today, which is in the middle of our conversation, suddenly the UPS man shows up with 700 pounds of tarot cards, which we figured adds up to something like 1,500 and something decks. Those that were present got up. A call was made to a member who lives just 2 blocks away who showed up, and therefore everyone who was here, including yourself, participated according to the levels of their physical ability to unload off a pallet all of these boxes of tarot cards. You weren't here. This happened at 5. If only you had come earlier, Brian. And we basically did fire brigade style. We did the process of getting all of these boxes of books down into a pallet in the storage area of our basement. And this was done through cooperative group effort. No one was coerced to do it. Everyone who came did it actually voluntarily. And through the effort of something like 5 people working together, this was done in, what, 20 minutes? Or less.
Awesome.
So that's an example to you how Pluto can work. It's when everything conspires to make it happen. And something that would have been grueling on a personal level is suddenly made easier because of group effort. It's like a sewing bee or a barn raising.
And it also does a whole lot more than just that. There's something else that happens in that group. Effort. I don't know. It's not just about making it easier, I kind of sense that some transformation or bonding or something else happens in it.
Yes, it's called moving from self-centeredness to selflessness.
Yeah. So there's a transformation that actually
It
occurs.
is.
Yeah.
It is transforming, and so when Pluto is transformed, it can be the most spiritual of the planets,
Yeah.
because it then works for universal welfare. It has nothing in mind other than fulfilling its place in God's great plan and working for the evolution of that plan. Yes.
Before you start that, I have two questions from
Mhm.
Alice Marie asks, what about the progressed ascendant? And Jeff from Chicago asks a question about Mars. I can read it.
Let me do one at a time.
Okay.
What about the progressed ascendant? Well, the progressed ascendant, and again, we touched on this in part last week. Any progressions involving the ascendant will impact the health, the physical body, matters of the personal appearance, and personal interest. So, but primarily, I think in 2 weeks, I want to look at health in the chart when we're doing majors, minors, and transiting reinforcements, because health is our greatest asset. And knowing periods of time when our health may be impaired is very important, and being able to foresee in advance problems that could be looming and to take remedial action prior to the expression of that problem is one of the best things you can do. Because how much can you do in life when you don't have your health? There ain't a whole lot. So that's the ascendant, and we'll have the opportunity to work with that over the next few weeks. And the question from Jeff on Mars?
It says, would a progressed Mars, very strong in the natal chart, conjunct the natal sun in Scorpio, very weak in the natal chart, be an example of a period of epical proportions in one's life? Should we read it again? Or?
Yes, I do. The quizzical look on my face meant that you lost me after the first 10 words. Okay.
Okay. Would a progressed Mars conjunct the natal sun in Scorpio be an example of a period of epical proportions in one's life?
Yes. The answer to that is yes, and what would be most helpful, more than the sign, is the house position where that's taking place, because that shows us where in one's life the energy is expressing itself. Zane considered Mars-Sun aspects to be quite energizing. And although they can bring with them incidents of accident or injury, it actually tends to be periods in one's life where they have more energy to do things than at other times. The vitality really increases, and therefore the ability towards accomplishment increases. Being in Scorpio, the sign of I desire, one has to, more than at any other time, focus in on controlling their passions rather than letting their passions control them. So that would be the downside to that aspect. But for the most part, it's like having a generator available to you to do energy in the area of the chart where the aspect, the conjunction, is taking place. Any progressed conjunction represents a period of prominence in one's life.
If there's some issue with, like, the sun and the vitality there, and then you've got something that happens with this progressed Mars that brings in energy, could that still be detrimental? Could that still make it hard for the sun?
Yes, it can still make it hard on the sun. For this example, you might be feeling so energetic that you decide you're going to go to the gym and press 150-pound weights, even though you haven't been in 3 months. Not smart. What happens to you? You injure yourself through over-exuberance, which is the nature of that aspect. And just apply that concept to anywhere else in life. You could come up against something with much greater force than you have the ability to control.
So having that extra energy doesn't necessarily feed into raising vitality. That's what I'm wondering.
Well, no, it does raise your vitality,
Yeah.
but you don't want to try and do things such as trekking Mount Everest unless you've actually started to also build up the force for that.
So there's a judgment issue.
I think there's an ability issue
All right.
because you may be feeling energetic but not have the skill required.
Oh, okay.
And when you start flailing about in an area for which you're not trained, what comes? Accident and injury.
Yeah.
You end up hurting yourself or someone else. Okay, I'm going to sail through this because we did this last week and hopefully all of you were awake. Progressed aspects, temporary stellar aerials, which attract events, experiences during their period of activity. This is an aerial. It's like an antenna. It picks up on energy from that's being radiated. In Hermetic progressions, we only allow progressions of 1 degree orb of aspect, except Zane states later that some aspects involving the Sun or Mars 2 degrees may be appropriate because you can actually start feeling the energy that far in advance. But we need something that we use as a standard of measurement. So 1 degree is it. Progressions have dates of entry, when they become exact or perfect, and when they leave. Applying aspects are considered to have more power to attract events than separating aspects. Where this is inaccurate is if you have additional rallying forces and or reinforcements from minors and transits after the aspect has become perfect, because then you have a buildup of energy taking place. Again from last week, and I think, Jeff, this addresses your earlier question. Progressions can stimulate 4 or more regions of the chart. That being the natal house position of both planets. Here we have Jupiter. Here we have what? Can you see the Sun? The house position of both planets by progression. Guess what? Jupiter doesn't move very far from its birthplace, considering it moves 1 degree about every 6 years. The Sun, however, we know is moving 1 degree every year. So in this case, if we were looking at this progression, we'd be looking at both 6th house employment, 12th house hidden forces. We'd be looking at the Sun, matters pertaining to honor, self-esteem, status, position. Would be looking at the influence of Jupiter, which is abundance, opportunity. And then we would also be looking at the 8th house, where the Sun is by progression. What is the 8th house? OPM. Other people's money, other people's resources. Well, and that's not all. As I said, there could be 4 or more areas that we look at. What sign of the zodiac does the Sun rule?
Leo.
So in this chart, Leo is on the cusp of the 7th house of marriage and partnerships, the public and alliances. And what sign or signs does Jupiter rule? Sagittarius, the sole ruler of Sagittarius, which is on the 11th house of friendships, groups, and organizations. And Pisces, on the cusp of the 2nd house of personal wealth and finance and values. So this one aspect, by progression, Sun trine Jupiter, is stimulating all of these areas of this individual's chart.
Do you find that a progressed aspect will in fact stimulate all those areas, or does it seem to be concentrated in one area?
Seems to be concentrated in one or more area.
Okay.
Generally, the more powerful of the planets is the more powerful aerial to receive activity. So we specifically look to that area by progression and by the natal position. But in the case, Vicki, of a house like the 2nd house, how else will that house get stimulated?
Only by a progressed aspect to Jupiter or Neptune.
So when a house is unoccupied, the only way you can expect any influence to come to that house is when the ruler of that house is engaged in some kind of progressed aspect. So unless by an unoccupied house, in this chart, the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 8th, the 10th, and the 11th, unless a planet either progresses into that house or the planet or planets governing the cusp of that house receive a progression, those areas of your life receive no stimulus. So we have to pay attention to those. This is this aspect. This is the chart of Barack Obama at the time that he won the election. Sun, an aspect of status and honor. To win an election, what do you generally need? A vast quantity of money. The resources of other people. The 8th house, natally, is unoccupied. But with the Sun by progression moving through the 8th house and forming a trine to Jupiter, what was he able to accomplish?
Massive amounts of money.
Massive amounts of money. What also happened right around that time in his life? Didn't one of his grandparents die?
His grandmother died.
Which is also an 8th house event. Does everyone grasp that? This is how progressions work. We have to synthesize a lot of information for any single
We're
aspect.
going to do more of that, right?
That's what we're going to be doing the rest of this evening, next week, the following week, and the week after that.
So you almost have to know yourself pretty well too, though, don't you? To know where you tend to spend your energy and.
You do, though your chart is a really good indicator of that.
Yeah.
My guess is with your 6th house, you spend a lot of time on your projects.
No, I do.
Yeah. With my chart, I spend a lot of time preparing for teaching or interacting with other people. You know, we all have different makeups of where we spend our energy, and sometimes we get surprised. Sometimes we just get surprised by what happens. And it's looking for those wild cards of, oh, he pulled in a lot of money. He got the support of others. That might not normally have been expected. Even in this chart where the sun is the weakest planet, you wouldn't expect a position of status or honor to take place necessarily. But there was a progression in orb that was lucky enough, this is a trine, to make this happen.
Well, it also sextiles his MC too, doesn't it? Isn't that the sun at 28 degrees, Virgo 14, and his MC's at 28 Scorpio?
Yes.
So that was a happy coincidence, wasn't it?
Yes, because as we decided earlier, that aspects to either the sun or the 10th midheaven or 10th house rulers stimulate position, honor, status. So there was a lot going on at this time. It was a conspiracy of events to move this person into a political position. So, there's the ruler of the 11th house. Jupiter rules the 2nd house, and the sun rules Leo on the 7th house. These are all the areas being stimulated by one aspect.
So here's where I get hung up though. Sometimes it's hard for me to pick the area that the energy's going to actually manifest as an event.
It is.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
And that's why you have to cover all your bases.
All right, okay.
All right, conditioning energy is the experience painful or pleasurable? That's what it boils down to. The way we determine this is by studying the natal chart. In Obama's chart, the moon is the strongest influence. What is that? The common people. The sun is the weakest influence. So we look also to the relative harmony or discord of any planet involved in an aspect to determine whether it's going to be pleasurable or painful. Well, Jupiter is really harmonious and the sun is reasonably discordant. So time will tell whether this was a good choice or not.
What is it about the Uranus and the discord about that? How would that manifest?
We'll have to look at the chart.
Uranus is in the 7th house.
Partnerships. Oh, in Leo.
So, pull together some keywords. Independent spouse, individualistic, free thinking.
She makes sudden appearances.
Sudden appearances. The 7th house is also your partners. And anytime you're in politics, you have strange bedfellows.
Kristen asks, what about the 8th house cusp ruler? Does this do anything on his chart?
Oh, is it Virgo?
It's Virgo.
It's Virgo, but it didn't do anything in this aspect, since this is the aspect we're looking at, and I don't have all the other aspects in orb. I just decided for this event to check one, because the election would be considered the most significant thing going on in his life at that time. What we would do, if we had greater curiosity about the 8th house, events involving death, or the influx of other people's money, or indebtedness, then we might also, if we were looking for that, then we might also decide to look at where is Mercury in the chart at that time, and what aspects Mercury is either forming or what aspects are formed by other planets to Mercury. But for expediency's sake, I'm going to move forward because we have quite a bit of material to cover tonight. And I think the part that'll be most interesting, I'm actually going to go through the aspects very quickly, since hopefully all of you having been through beginning class, I can skip actually the aspects. You should have this in your notes, but aspects go from mild to powerful, harmonious, neutral, discordant. You know all of this information, what Mars, Venus and Jupiter add, what Mars and Saturn adds. This is all more beginning level information. And there's the nature of the aspects, which I think I included in your handout, so you can review this later. The houses are important, and I'm going to go through this very quickly because basically planets move forward unless they're retrograde. And you can have a planet move from your 11th house to your 10th house, and suddenly the influence shifts. This is repetitive information here. But basically, what's important on this page is the bottom line. We look to the houses activated by progressions to determine what areas of life will be stimulated. First house, health, physical body. Second house, money, values, possessions. Third house, your intellectual life. I'm going through this very quickly because I've given it to you in notes and I want to get on to looking at charts. Fourth house, if we're looking for a question about moving, real estate, property, we look to the fourth house and its ruler. Fifth house, we already talked about that, love, romance, and the end result, children. But your creative life can also be involved. If your questions are about work, your co-workers, relationships to tenants, etc., we're looking to the ruler or rulers of the sixth house and their progressions. If you're concerned about marriage and or your opponents, which sometimes marriage can feel like, then you're looking to the seventh house. The spirit world, death, and other people's money, we already decided was the eighth house. And international travel, your philosophic life, your education and spiritual life are progressions to involving the ruler or rulers of the ninth house. Career, honor, reputation, 10th house. Friends, groups, organizations, the 11th house. And if the impact in your life is on your inner life, your intuitions, and or anything in which you might be confined, be it a hospital, prison, state of mind, etc., is the 12th house. It's important to know the houses because, again, this adds, Vicki, to your earlier question, how do you know what's going on? And it's only through combining the vocabulary for those areas that we can inform someone. So, reading a progressions report, this will be almost impossible for those of you who are watching online, but when I pull up the horoscope program, hopefully it will be much clearer to you. Basically, every aspect can be listed chronologically. This means at the top of the page, the aspects that have been in orb the longest to those that have entered most recently. Guess what? Some of the aspects in your chart, especially if they look like parallels, they may have been there since the time you were born. Those are hard things to necessarily feel or to assign specific experiences to, because this is much like your computer software, your virus programs and things like that that are just constantly running in the background of the computer. They're not that noticed unless there is some kind of minor progression or transit that comes along and stimulates them. Oftentimes when I'm looking at progressions, I will go into the progressions format and select to eliminate the parallel aspect. That immediately shortens the length of the report and takes me to the hard aspects by longitude to look at. If I cannot find an event that is not signified in the chart by one of the hard aspects, I will then look to the parallels and see if that might be the stimulus in the chart. But generally they're not. This is a little larger. When you're reading the report, based on a 1-degree orb, we look to see when the planet enters aspect, when the planet becomes exact, when the aspect becomes exact, and the date it leaves orb. What is this? I call it a window of opportunity. That's what we're looking at. If this event is going to manifest in your life, then with Venus conjunct Uranus, if this wild love affair is going to take place, then it's going to somehow happen between July of 2006 and March of 2008. Oh, bad news. It's past. You either had your opportunity or you didn't, yes.
I have a question about the Venus, and that's always, the first symbol on that thing is always the natal symbol?
Nope.
Okay.
Progress.
It doesn't mean anything.
It means something. and
Well,
I'll
you
tell
don't
you.
know if it's Venus or, but the conjunct, the Uranus has the R, that means natal, right?
Yes,
And
the letter R, just to make less sense, means radical or natal. So if you see, and I think I have this actually somewhere in my presentation.
Oh, okay. Well, you're gonna answer it later, that's fine. Oh, there it is.
So how do you?
Yeah, here's the answer to the question.
Okay.
The first symbol in the series indicates the planet forming the aspect by progression.
Okay.
So the first line, the first planet you see is the progressed planet. The second symbol is the aspect that is being formed. And the third symbol is the planet with which the aspect is being formed. The letter R following the planet indicates that this is radical, or a planet in the natal chart. If there is a P after this, then it means it is a progressed planet.
What about if it's retrograde? In retrograde, do you indicate that here?
It's indicated on the wheel, but not
Oh,
in
yes.
the aspect
So you'll need to
report.
kind of flip that to look at that to see.
Hopefully you are when you're doing progressions, because you
Yeah.
need to know 4 or more areas that are being stimulated.
Yeah.
And few of us have the type of minds that can photographically remember that. We actually need to see the material and the chart that we're looking at. All right, major progressed moon. This quote is in your notes. Let's move on. Basically, what's important here, now let me move over this. Major progressed moon will spend 2.5 years in most of the houses in your chart, unless you're Vega, who was born in Iceland, and you have some houses that have 65 degrees of, from one house cusp to the next, and then only 15 degrees in other houses. Those 15-degree houses, chances are the moon will move through that house in 14 months. And the 60-degree houses, this is going to take 5 years for the moon to move through that house. Yes, you can feel the house in your chart that the moon is passing through. It stimulates it. And it brings your emotional attention, it brings your mental interest to that area of your life during the period it is moving through that house. Major progressions of the moon attract sub-major events. Unless your chart is like mine or Obama's, where the moon is the dominant planet, and major progressions of the moon will be felt. All right, I actually am going to skip the interpretation guidelines and save those for next week or the week thereafter. What I want to do is start looking at charts, which requires my changing position.
Can I go with that, Christopher?
Probably. Let's see, those are our students. But let's look at some notables, besides our notable students. And
So these aren't gonna be in people's notes when you look at your,
no, sorry, you gotta watch the show.
Do you know whose chart you're looking for?
I'll zoom in
No.
so people can see.
In fact, I'm having trouble finding the charts I had prepared for tonight. Well, here's one. Okay, I just opened up a chart. To progress the chart, we go up to Tools. I'll see if I can do that from my desk here. That way I can stand up here and talk. Tools, Progress Chart. You can progress it to a specific date. This would be today's date. This is the chart of...
But he's dead.
Yeah, so we won't do that. But what I'd like to do, since we were talking earlier about honors, let's look to see a time when he may have received some kind of honor. And in 1949, let's...
Do you have, somebody asked if you have Zane's chart to look at? Never mind.
You can find it in the books, Course 1. I believe it's in the front piece of Course 1, Laws of Occultism. Is that correct?
No.
No?
But I can find it for you.
Yeah. December 12th, 1982 in Adel, Iowa at 5:55 a.m. Look it up yourself.
1982. Is it 1982?
Oh, 1882,
Yeah.
thank you. Don't believe a word I say.
Can you give us that again, please?
December 12th, 1982. No, 1881. December 12th, 1881, Adel, Iowa, 5:55 a.m. There's some things I can't do from the podium. So, an aspect that might involve one's honor. In 1949, Marcel Marceau received the Devereux Prize. We decided that matters of honor are determined by what planets? The sun, for one, is going to be key.
MC.
The MC and or planet or
ruling.
planets ruling the 10th house. So if we're looking for honor, that's all we have to look at in a chart. Well, where was the sun at this time? 26 Aries. And in the natal chart, it's at 0 Aries. By progression, Mars is at 0 Gemini, forming a sextile to the natal sun. So what's happening during this period of time that he received an honor, we can see the sun thought cells were being stimulated. To add to that, however, the progressed midheaven
'29.
Thank you, I can't see from this angle.
29 Aquarius.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see that.
To Mars, to progress Mars, was also forming an aspect. What's the aspect?
It's Aquarius and what? Gemini?
Gemini.
Prime. Oh, no.
No. And degrees of Aquarius.
Yeah. So it's
A square.
square, yeah.
Guess what? Good things can happen under bad aspects. Now, who knows? He may have dropped the trophy on his toe on the way home or something like that. Something may have been less desirable about this. But nevertheless, any aspect in your chart is stimulating energy. So at this time, even though this aspect involving the midheaven was a square, it still stimulated an event into expression. Okay, another time that he received an honor. I'm going to ask your help, Vicki. Just go in and change the progression year to 1970. Actually, for the outer wheel of the
Oh,
chart.
just the outer wheel. Okay, sorry.
And then I'll have you do the other since you're up there.
If I had the
The
mouse,
mouse.
it would be easier.
Like the Stygian witches, you'll have to return it to me because there's
Okay.
only
What year is it?
1970.
And any particular month or just?
No, we don't know the month.
Okay.
Sometimes, here's a really important thing to do. Oftentimes with notable people, you can find really good biographies that actually show the month, the date of events in their lives. Others, that's not considered as important to some historians, just the year. So when you can find that, it's even better in your research. I also strongly recommend what each of you do. I'm a record keeper. Some might think obsessively so. Because I have calendars going back 35 years. Why? Because I'm a nut. And with this stuff, it's really helpful. If you want to prove astrology to yourself, who do you know better than yourself? And if you can go back and create a timeline of your own life, this could be anything. When you broke your arm and went to the hospital or had your tonsils out, or when you graduated high school, got your first job, boyfriend, girlfriend, just start creating a timeline. If you don't know the exact month or day, then try working with the year. And then what you want to do is go back and start looking at the list of your aspects from birth forward. And constraining what you look for according to what? What we studied earlier. Either the planet, that would signify the event, the house that signifies the specific activity, and the planet or planets ruling them. All right, what's going on in 1970 for him? What do we look for
So
in
what
terms
was
of...
the event? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Is it an honor event?
Yes, but I didn't tell you.
Oh,
In 1970, he was named a Chevalier de la Légion d'Honneur by the French government. Basically, a Knight of the Legion of Honor. Yes.
Uranus sextile.
That's a big deal in France. We may go, what did he say? But
Yeah.
Is that like a knighthood? Is that actually like a knighthood?
I don't know. I know the British system better than the French.
Is it a fraternity?
Can't answer that. All I know is it's an honor. You get a...
Okay. Well, I was.
I don't know
thinking-
if you're actually knighted with the sword. The French don't have a monarchy, so it makes no sense for
Well, it's
them
yeah.
to do that.
It's a social, but it's a group of people.
Yeah, it'd be like, you know, not as big as winning the Nobel Peace Prize, which is a huge international
Yeah.
gain, which also usually has a purse that comes with it. But, you know, you get a medallion and a hearty handshake, so that means something.
All right. Well, he's got Uranus sextile the sun, and Uranus in the 11th though. So you 11th house. He has a whole new group of friends.
Okay, that could be taking place. And also, where's progressed Venus? 14 Aries. And she is forming a trine to Neptune, I believe, by progression. Huh, that may be off. Did we get the right year in there?
Well, you have April, so you might want to try December, if it's for the whole year. You know.
Now Venus would have passed by then. Okay, no, it's there. That is 1970. Well, my notes are showing a trine. Can anyone see what this number
It's
is?
15 degrees Leo.
Oh, thank you. I can't see. So.
Yeah. Right.
So that's a trine.
Uh-huh.
Well, we wouldn't necessarily think of Venus as a planet of honor, would we?
Uh-huh.
But look here. What does Venus rule in the natal chart? The 10th house of one's status, one's reputation. So the thing is, if you were interpreting this chart, the natural inclination with Venus would be to say, ooh, you know, you could have a wild romance with the domestic, or something like that. But it is also stimulating matters of honor and reputation. So there's two examples of what we look for in terms of honor in a chart. Although I wanted to talk about health in a few weeks, there is something about this chart I find to be outstanding. And Vicki, would you progress the chart to September 22nd, 2007?
September?
Yes. And 22nd, which is already there. And 2007.
Come back here. Oh,
Sorry, I know.
You're.
I forgot to give this back to you. I'm not a big witch.
Oh, and there was the. the two-rear mouse and that.
I guess this overrides. Okay, what's happening here? Progressed ascendant, square Mars.
in the fourth house.
Mm-hmm.
Things go boom.
Yeah, things go boom. The ascendant being the physical body. Mars, we know, usually brings some degree of strife. At the same time, Mars Looks like 9 degrees Cancer. What's the degree on Jupiter here?
9
Nine.
degrees of Scorpio.
So there's a trine going on between Mars and Jupiter, the ruler of the 8th house. He dies. You want to know where?
At home.
Racetrack.
Wow.
Look, Sagittarius on the cusp of the 8th house.
Oh.
Where did this man die? He was betting on the ponies.
That's pretty funny.
He's guessing.
What do you do at a racetrack, Vicky?
You're betting on the ponies.
Yeah. It didn't win. Shouldn't make light of that, but I just thought this was a great example
That was a good example.
of the language that's encoded in our charts.
Yeah.
Who would have thunk? All right, let's pull up another chart. Let me give this to you momentarily.
Oh, thank you. Anybody in particular that I'm looking for?
Ooh.
Timothy McVeigh,
Do you have John Lennon's chart by any chance?
No,
Okay.
but if anyone has it, they can send it in. Let's see, what's a good one? I have aspects up here for Ted Turner, Jacques Cousteau. Let's pull up Cousteau's. Go down to Uranus, if it's in there, and let's see if we have Cousteau's chart. Okay, Vicky.
progress 2.
All right, what's a good thing to... Let's talk about relationships. 1937, July 12th. This is the date that he married Simone Melchior. Looking for marriage in a chart. What are we interested in?
In his chart?
Mm-hmm.
Mars.
And or,
Venus.
thank you. Any aspects of Venus can bring about a marriage, or aspects to the planet or planets ruling the 7th house. How does Mars sound like to have as the ruler of your 7th house?
Well, I have that, so it works.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever pick her?
No.
Okay. It works.
There's an art to that, you know.
I've heard. So I have heard. Okay, Mars rules the 7th house. What's going on with Mars in this chart? By progression. 12 degrees Leo.
Oh, right over the moon.
Oh, wow.
Man.
Are conjunctions important events?
Yeah.
They're very important events. The moon represents female sex in general. It represents family, home, domesticity. He actually had 2 sons with Simone, who's Pierre-Yves. No, that was with his mistress. Jean-Michel and Philippe were his 2 sons. So, he married under a very strong aspect in his chart. but we can be led to believe that with Mars as the ruler of the 7th house, is marriage something that came easily?
No.
There was probably both passion and strife going on in his marriage. And I actually think there was another aspect in Orb as well stimulating Mars.
His ascendant square, isn't it?
Yes, progressed ascendant at the time of his marriage was squaring Mars. Now,
Squaring his natal Mars.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry. A little slow this late at night.
that's okay.
Was it?
You're doing a good job for staying up so late. So, here's an event of marriage coming into one's life under what we might consider adverse progressions. However, he respectfully remained married to her until her death. That obviously indicates a very strong relationship. She used to show up on a lot of the television, doing stuff in the background, fussing around, keeping things together. So she was obviously a very active force in his life. But in the French fashion, during much of his married life, he also had a mistress who he married after Simone's demise. So he married again December 2nd, 1990.
Do you want me to do that?
Oh wait, no, I'm sorry, that's 1991 he married. So
Do you
let's,
want me to do that?
bring the progressions up.
How old was he then?
What's the birth date? I can't see.
He's been pretty old.
Another one of those things that guys can get away with.
1999, you said?
91.
91.
Oh, 91.
1991. So now Venus just went over his ascendant.
All right. In this case, it's not a Mars aspect, but Venus to Jupiter. It's a sextile. This is probably something he really wanted to do for a long time.
Are we talking progressed Venus to progressed Jupiter, or?
Correct.
Okay, then it makes sense.
Progressed Venus, 15 Leo,
Right.
to progressed Jupiter, 14 Libra. That is a sextile. So Venus and Jupiter, the great benefics. Venus represents love, romance, partnership, even though the 7th house is not directly engaged, which might be a good thing with this chart since it's Mars ruled. You can see here the second marriage in his life took place under a Venus progression. So we look at both areas to determine marriage. All right, everyone's exhausted. We'll close with this. Next week, we're talking about minor progressions, but again, keep in mind that minors relate back to majors. And if you have a burning question, any student in class who's willing to reveal themselves, or anyone who's online, let me know. If there's an aspect of your chart you want me to look at, then let me know what your name and what that is, and hopefully I have your birth information. And we may include that over the next couple of weeks in our looking at progressions. Let us say hello to Martha in New Orleans, Renee in British Columbia, Jeff in Chicago, Mike in England, I believe he's in London, Lacey in Atlanta, Bill in Glendale, David in Guilford, Connecticut, Kristen in California, and Alice Marie in San Diego, who attended tonight via the internet, and everyone in this room. So,
What about this homework?
that's great. Thank you for bringing my attention to that. You have homework. Imagine that. In fact, the homework would be great for you to work on, and if you want me to share this, we can certainly look at the aspect in one of the upcoming classes. But what I'd like you to do is look at your chart. I've sent most of you who have requested them your chart with its current progressions. Pick an aspect. And I'm asking that you pick a significant aspect. What are significant aspects?
One with a lot of power?
Yes, conjunctions, oppositions, squares, trines, sextiles, just to name a few. Write down, just basically follow this list. The planet forming the aspect in my chart is, the urges ruled by this planet are, you're working with your keywords here. When occupying any house this planet attracts, let's say we're working with Neptune. The planet forming in the aspect of my chart is Neptune. The urges are utopian. When occupying this house, the planet attracts illusion. Put down the date the aspect enters, the date it becomes exact, and the date the aspect leaves. Then you want to write down the planet receiving the aspect. Well, if it really was Neptune you chose as the planet forming the aspect, chances are this aspect's in your natal chart and it lasts your entire life, so pick something else. But the planet receiving the aspect is, let's say it's Venus, and then you want to mark down whether it's natal or progressed. The urges ruled by this planet, if it's Venus, it's social. When occupying any house, this planet attracts gratuities. The aspect being formed is a sextile. The keyword for this aspect is opportunity. The conditioning nature of this aspect is, perhaps it's harmonious in your natal chart. The volume of energy this aspect carries is, let me know. We don't want to pick mild. Hopefully you're picking powerful or an average aspect. So I shouldn't even have put mild there, but someone might pick a semi-sextile. What are the house positions of both planets by progression? Write it down. The matters ruled by these houses. What are the natal house positions of the planet? Write it down. And some of the matters ruled by these houses. This may be boring you in the moment, but this is the way you learn how progressions work. You work your keywords, you work your details. Looking at my natal chart, what is the astrodyne power of the planet forming the aspect? What is the harmodyne or discordyne power of the planet forming the aspect? Do these planets form any aspects to one another in the natal chart? If so, what is the natal aspect? Then, the hard part of this job, I might lose the microphone somewhere. It slips down my shirt.
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me now? Create a sentence or two describing the nature of this aspect, combining the keywords of both planets, the aspect being formed, and the houses involved. Got that?
Got it.
This is your chance to do creative writing. You get to make stuff up as to how this might express. And there is, of course, more than one way, but this is the way to get you to start thinking creatively about major progressions. Not what is inevitable, but what is probable. And you can actually apply this to as many aspects in your progress chart as you want to do.
Can a person do aspects from cusps?
The only cusp that we treat as planets
Is that the
are the ascendant and the midheaven.
But you can't necessarily do it from from where you've got an empty house and then you've got the ruler. Oh, you can't. Yeah. Okay. So you couldn't do anything.
We don't measure aspects to house cusp unless it's the cusp of the first house or the 10th house. But you can look at the planet. If it's governing an occupied house, you can still give interpretation for that house.
So you interpret where that planet is and how it's operating, and then you can apply it into
that
area. Okay, thanks.
All right. I'm going to say good night to all of you, and next week be prepared for minor progressions. Thank you.
Thank you.